Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and today I have Miss Anya with us, and she is the author of Dreaming in Russian. And I am so excited to have Anya here with us today to talk about her experience coming to the U.S. from Russia and also her book. Welcome, Anya. Thank you so much for being here today. If you could just introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and get right into your upbringing in Russia.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for having me, Heidi. My name is Anya, and by trade, I'm an attorney, but also I've always been a writer at heart, and I always wrote ever since I was a girl in Russia. And my first book actually was a book of poetry in Russian, which I published a number of years ago here in America, but in Russian through a Russian publisher. And a few years ago, during COVID, I finally, took a plunge, I guess, into writing this book, which I had an idea first to write a while ago. So, it's partly a memoir and partly kind of a social commentary on my experience living in both countries.
So you wrote this during COVID?
Well, I began writing it 2021. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we'll definitely have to get into
Yeah.
that a little bit later when we talk about your book. And oh
Yeah.
my gosh, wait, what kind of attorney are you? What law do you practice?
I am an immigration attorney. So,
No way.
yeah. So
Okay.
it's sort of partly predictable, but I don't. My niche is very specified. I work
Okay.
on on visas. It's a specialty visa category. So talent visas. Actually, it has a name: extraordinary ability visas. So it's very
Is it like
special.
it
Talent.
starts with a E, right? EB.
Yes,
Oh,
EB1s.
EB1, that's the one. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Because I've interviewed other attorneys that specialize in those visas as well. Okay, that's cool. All
Right.
right. Oh, okay. And how long have you been practicing for specifically for that visa?
I started practicing law in 2008, 2009. That's after
Okay.
I got my license. But within that specific field, probably um took me a while to get going. Probably since 2014, 2015, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay,
So.
cool. All right. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Russia.
Well, it was definitely very different from, I would say, boldly from most people who grew up in the Soviet Union in the late 70s and 1980s, because at that time it was definitely the midst of the stagnation period. So it
Mm.
was the Brezhnev era. So I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I mean, whoever knows what Brezhnev era it was, I mean, it was definitely the Iron Curtain at its best or at its worst. Soviet Union was intact
Mm.
at that time. All the 15 republics, it contained the 15 republics. It was the largest country in the world. People spoke at least 15 or more languages and dialects. It was huge. It was a huge country with at least eight time zones. But the country was slowly crumbling from the inside, find economically and I think in many other ways. But the country was intact, and it was absolute political stagnation. People weren't allowed to speak out and to do many other things. And However, at the same time, I was growing up in a very different family, mostly due to how my father was. My father was the man for all seasons. He was, I mean, everybody was educated in the Soviet Union. Soviet Union had 99 point, I don't know, 9% literacy. So
Wow.
people were exceptionally educated. There wasn't a family that didn't have, um, you know, uh, books covering every single wall in the apartment. Whether you were a blue collar worker or a professor in the university, that wasn't the issue. But people were afraid to talk. People were afraid, obviously, those who knew what was going on outside the Soviet Union did not express their view, and a lot of people just didn't know because information wasn't available. But
Mhm.
people like my dad, and there were some, they were still afraid to express their view. My father wasn't. He was a radical, he was a dissident at heart, and he despised and loathed the system in which he lived. He was born during the war, 1942. He was the son of a surgeon, medical surgeon, a
Mhm.
doctor, and he himself was a physician. He was a pulmonologist and cardiologist. He had made his name as a doctor, and he happened to be um, an in- an incredible physician, a more
Yeah.
than an incredible physician. He was the only one who treated and cured asthma. His initial specialty was cardiology, but he had developed into a pulmonologist. It became his new specialty. In the Soviet Union at the time, nobody cured, nobody treated, nobody really know how to take care of asthma and pulmonary illnesses. And meanwhile, it was a prevalent disease. My father had endeavored and just put his efforts into that research, and he had become the most successful researcher, scientist, scholar, and a doctor in that area. Because of that, he had managed to have a private practice, to open a private practice in a country where private practice of anything was an anathema, it was a taboo, and it was plainly illegal. But the thing is, when you're a doctor and when you know how to cure people, uh, people go to you, and a lot of the society and the government and the law, they kind of turns a blind eye on that. With my dad, whose private practice of medicine had become basically a basic thing and an everyday thing, it was dangerous, and but they still turned a blind eye on that because of how successful he was. People were dying like flies because of asthma,
Mm.
and he really, I mean, he saved people's lives like God. And even though he could be denounced, and there were efforts to denounce him all the time, especially because we were Jews, and it was just it was like a red bull in the china shop, like that you could
Mhm.
just, it was very easy to do. But because of the success of his practice of what he did, he was useful not only to regular poor people, factory workers, miners who were sick with that illness left and right, but people who were part of a governmental hierarchy. They were ill with the same sickness and other illnesses as well. They needed him as much as regular people did from all over the Soviet Union. So my father was the sort of person who was needed desperately by the society at large. And that gave him an opportunity to feel free, and become eventually a wealthy man in a country where money, taboo, freedom were loathed, despised, and not acceptable. In addition to which, my father, even though he had become a very privileged man, he still despised the system where he lived. And he had brought me up despising that as well.
Mm.
So I lived, my sister, my mom, and I myself, I lived in a bubble. I grew up in a bubble of privilege. Uh, and still very much aware that the privilege was given to me not by the government and not by the country, but by my father, by my parents.
Yeah.
My mom is a concert pianist, so she also was this, she belonged to this very strange part of a society which one can't really see, touch, feel, but only it's a very abstract, it's the arts. How do
Hmm.
you, it's not a real job, it's a job, but it's a strange job. And my father was this medical doctor who didn't go to work. He stopped going to the office. He treated people at home. And I was exposed to hundreds of patients who he consulted and saw on a daily basis in our apartment. Nobody, no, people don't even do it here in America like that. People have offices where they see patients. Nobody sees them in the apartment. But
Yeah.
in the Soviet Union, to live like that and being exposed to people who are suffering from an illness, and being a witness to people being uh, uh, you know uh, ill, to people being helped, assisted, sympathized with. That's a very special experience, and my sister and I were exposed, especially myself, exposed to that since can remember myself walking, first. And my father wasn't, again, he was aware where he lived. He was very much aware who he was dealing with, and he knew how to talk to everybody, how to talk
Mm.
to the government, how to talk to the regular people. And in my book, I go into very, very major detail on who were his patients, and they were
Yes.
everyone. Yeah.
You definitely go into detail about that, about your dad's practice and all of his patients and everything, and also in details of to how you guys lived in Russia. And can you tell? I know you also go into details about what brought you guys to the United States, but if you can share a little bit about that with the listeners, not not give away too much so they can read more in the book. But yeah, what events led you guys to move to the U.S.?
Well, in general, my father's dream was always America. That was his eventual dream. He had that dream of America. He brought me up with that dream of America,
Hmm.
and I mean, I he believed in America, in that you know thing, and he always thought that, especially when it had to do with me, that one day I would come and live here. We would go and live there. So uh, when he did very well in Russia financially and career wise and everything. So it became harder and harder for him to just close the door and just go into the unknown, and become a regular immigrant and live on nothing and start all over again. So he thought, one day we'll go. I'll send my daughter to live and to study there and go to school and become successful. But he but everything unfortunately ended and started and began not as he would have expected it to be. um my father's as my husband now like sometimes says, his dream of America had eventually killed him and brought us still to America. Nevertheless, my parents in 1990 came to America as tourists. leaving my sister and I behind in Russia. So it was just their trip together. It was their, just two of them came to see their friends. And uh, d- it- during, it was a freak accident that wasn't supposed to happen.
Mm.
Uh, um, my mother was attacked in the middle of the night. Um, and my father was her protector. He shielded her from a mugger, from a robber, from a bullet, and he took the bullet as a result.
Wow.
It was just one of those. It was like my mom still says. She said it was like a bad movie. Like you can't make it up. And
Yeah.
but he was literally the bullet was meant for my mother, but my father saw the attacker from behind. There were other people in the group with them, and he jumped on my mom, protecting her from the attacker and shielding her from the gun. And he got the bullet. Um, so my father was murdered that night, June 24th, 1990. He was 47 years old.
Wow.
Um, he the bullet ruptured his body, bomb bullet, and he died on that night. And um, he it was announced all over the news. At that time, there were very few Soviet tourists visit as visitors in America. Very few. It was just after perestroika. Tourism wasn't that big. There were immigrants who were living in America, but not many tourists at all. So my grandparents, who were staying with us in Russia, heard it on the news, the Voice of America,
Wow.
and literally that night, with the time difference or whatever, yeah. And we didn't know for many weeks because it was being hidden from us. My family was very famous in the Soviet Union, so everyone knew who we
Mhm.
were.
I mean,
So
everybody was your dad's patient, so
yeah,
yeah.
everyone.
Mhm.
And but when everything after everything had happened, and after everything, we buried my father in Moscow. Eventually my mom came back with a casket, and we buried him in Moscow. And everything had occurred. uh, we still made the decision to come to America because it was my father's dream. And that's how my father saw it, and that's how he wanted it. And also, but also more on a prosaic note, um, there was nothing else for us to do in Russia. It's because sometimes, when I talk about it, and sometimes people ask me the same question: why did you come to America, even though that's what happened in America? How could you come to America? I mean, it's very simple, because for a widow with two small children, well, I was 13, my sister was 12. uh, it was it was it was difficult. There was no future for us in Russia. We had an incredible apartment. It was like a palace we lived in, but um, there was it was a terrible time in Russia at that time. Russia was changing; it was on the brink of collapse with everything that was going on in the 90s. And my father was the only breadwinner. Mm, and the life as we literally knew it uh, was ending, and it was never going to return to
Yeah.
us. So, and I saw it ending in front of me. I felt how it was ending. I felt it, like, physically, visually, emotionally. So, and again, the book talks about it. And
Mhm. Yeah.
so, yeah, so America was the way, as it's always been the way for people who don't see any other way.
Yeah, for sure. And so tell us about arriving to the US and what was one of the first cultural shocks that you experienced here?
Um, well, because I always wanted to come to America, and I was very optimistic about it. So it was, well, also before we actually settled in America, I did come, it was 2 years between what happened to my dad and us actually coming to live here. And in
Mm,
between those 2 years, I went to the school. I went to this specialized English school. They have regular schools in Russia and specialized schools. So I went to the specialized English school where English was the predominant language, and so it had special programs with English speaking countries where we did exchanges, like with America, with the UK, with Australia, and so we did an exchange with American schools, and I went and I visited one of the schools in Connecticut, and we stayed for a month. So I did visit America before we actually came and lived here. But of course, when we came and settled in America, it was very different, and I was very excited. I felt like I had a lot to look forward to, but I, even though my mom and my sister and this person that we were settling with, my mom's, her, as in the book, her love interest, we were all settling together in New York. I was not going to settle in New York for a year. I was going to settle in Westport in Connecticut. So, because there was a school that was interested in me, and they invited me to do my last school year there before
yeah.
college. So I thought that was great because I already knew the school, and that wouldn't be that difficult. Westport and New York City, not that far away, and I'll just go visit my mom in New York every weekend. Easier said than done. And I think my culture shock, like thinking about it now, um, was was not. Um, I think I took a bite bigger than I can swallow. I guess that's what they say, right? Is that yes, I spoke English, but I thought, I'll have no problem with English after 8 or 9 years of learning, studying in depth English and having the grammar and everything. But I very quickly understood that I knew absolutely nothing. I had no colloquial knowledge. I had no knowledge of how Americans really and people really communicate. I had no knowledge of what people are really like. And I remember all those exchanges between Russian and American schools, how everybody loved to say, oh, we're all the same, and all those bridges of friendship, and the Cold War is over, we're all the same. And remember how quickly I realized how different we all really are, and people like to say that, but it's just like to put a band-aid over differences between people so quickly. But the truth is people are very different. And I think it's always I think it's better when people accept the differences, because then it will be easy to build the bridges. And I remember how I realized that, especially coming from Moscow, huge city, huge cosmopolitan major city, suddenly just drowning in Westport, quiet, very homogenous town. That was a major culture shock. My heart wanted to be in Manhattan, where my mom and my sister were, and I remember I was just deeply, deeply. Um, I don't like using the word depressed, but I was just numb with probably with just shock with where I ended up. I thought I was going to be excelling in the school, just taking all these subjects and just doing performances and plays and here and there. And no, I was giving one little line in some play that they were doing. It was just nothing was coming easy to me, but it's just everything ended up being a harsh adjustment to a new way of life. Everything, and that was just a taste of what was to come. But you have to also remember, I was 16, and and everybody was 2 years older in my senior class than me. So I was very young, but I was still expecting lots of things. It's not like nothing devastated me. And yet still, it was very, it was like a stone, like I felt like there was a brick over my heart. Like, oh, I thought things are not as easy as I thought. And I had to apply to colleges and I had to do this. And I thought everything was going to be easier. And suddenly I started feeling those pangs that things are not as easy as I thought they were going to be. And only when I came after 2 months, I realized that Connecticut wasn't for me. Westport was definitely not for me. And I just wanted to go back. I wanted to be in New York with my mom and my sister. And I wanted to be in New York and Manhattan. I'm a city person. And my mom took me back. Took me, my sister wanted me to be next to her. And, I woke up in New York. And when I saw the streets, and I walked those streets in the morning, and I went to a tiny school in Manhattan, not the big Westport school there with all those people. Tiny, tiny school, and where everybody took me in as one of their own. Everyone was very strange, but they didn't care how strange they were. They definitely didn't care that I was a stranger from a different country, and I felt at home. So and but every day was an adjustment. Just when I felt like, oh, I think I feel much better, there was yet something new around the corner that I had to discover. And it continued for a while until I finally stopped noticing things, you know uh, but I have to tell you that I have now been in this country 33 years. So I've lived here longer than I obviously lived in Russia. And I still pinch myself that I'm obviously an immigrant. I'll always be an immigrant. And obviously I'm totally fine with it. But I pinch myself. I know who I am. And I always know I'm discovering things that feel to me that I am that I'm in my second skin. So it's very curious.
Yeah, I love how you put that. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and your writing process? Like, when did you know that you wanted to write this book, and how was that writing process for you?
And it was also much more difficult than I obviously thought that it was going to be, because I uh, everything I always knew I was going to write. I wanted to write something since my father's death, because I always thought it was going to be about my dad. I always thought it was going to be dedicated to my dad. And then, of course, as life continued and progressed, lots of experiences in my life. And when I look at my life in retrospect, especially about my grandparents, their life, how they lived, they were incredible human beings, and the lives they've led, everything started adding up. And about how I lived here, I always compared and contrasted my experience living here and my experiences in Russia. I thought, well, I got to write about this, and I got to think about that, and what happened to me here and there. But then, when you think about things, everything is so logical in one's head. In my head, at least, it was very logical, and I thought it was going to be so easy to put it together. But of course, when you're faced with a blank piece of paper and you have to start writing it in a logical form, I mean, you're faced with how you're going to put together chronologically. Um, and whether you put it chronologically or how you deal with that in the sense that that the people will understand it, and how you can convince them, how convincingly, this is where the problem arises. And the more emotional you are about the subject, the more difficult it is to make it um, convincing. So if you're removed, it's much easier emotionally. But if you're very emotionally involved, it's much harder. So at first it was hard, but then when I figured out the plan and how I was going to deal with it chronologically, and just simply said to myself, I'm just going to tell the story. Just tell the story, how it happened. Who was my father? And who's my mother? Because this is how sometimes you talk to a person and sometimes they ask you, so tell me about what happened here and what happened in a simple way, and maybe that will just bring it out of you. You'll start bringing things out. Another thing that I discovered that was curious is that uh, how much I thought I may not remember everything because it's a memoir, and I thought, well, am I going to remember everything? I mean, things that happened deeply in the childhood. But the more I wrote, the more I remembered. The more I wrote, the more I remembered, and that was very, very peculiar. Um, there were very bad days when, of course, and I'm sure lots of people who are way more skillful than me, probably faced with this. There are days when you can't write anything. It's so much more, um, laborious than inspirational. I mean, if you have 40 minutes of inspiration in a day, it's a very beautiful day. It's a beautiful day if you have that, because sometimes it's just a day of working on one sentence and you just work on that sentence and work on that sentence, and that it's hard, it's especially, I mean, this is my first book, and I mean, English, I hate saying that because I will never ever use anything as an excuse. English it's my second language, but it's my working language. I've been dealing with this language for most of largest part of my life, in law school, in college, and every day, you know. But it is still the kind of language that I do feel insecure about a lot of times, and I have to be careful how I use it. You
Yeah,
know,
I mean, that's one of the things that I love about interviewing immigrant authors is just like this isn't their first language that they're publishing a book in, so I feel like that is such an incredible accomplishment and something that they should be very very proud of. And I mean, it's well written. I mean, it makes sense, and I'm sure you had editors and stuff to like go through and everything. But yeah, you should definitely be very very proud of yourself to be able to publish a
um,
book in a language that isn't your native one. Can you tell the audience where they can find your book?
well, they can online. I mean, the easiest, of course, is Amazon. They can buy a hard copy, and it's also on Kindle. And then there are on Goodreads, and there are some other independent online sources where they can find it. Like it's easy on Target. I mean, many. I saw it on many different
Oh,
sources where they can find
oh,
it.
that's awesome. I'll go ahead and include a couple links in the show notes and
Yeah,
show description so people it'll be easier to find for the listeners to get your book. And Anya, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. And the last question to wrap up this interview is, what does the American dream mean to you?
I will not say to not give up, but I will say to never lose inspiration to go on. Yeah, I think for America, you need to have inspiration, a lot of inspiration to move on and just to keep going.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being willing to come on the show to share your journey. And then also just, thank you for writing the book and providing more details and more insights into, your story, your dad's story, a little bit of your grandparents' story as well, and your mom and your sister. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for interviewing me.
Thank you for listening to Mummy Podcast.